In an age long before clocks and crowded cities, when valleys were young and mountains spoke in mists, there lived a noble king named Rowan. His keep, built of pale stone, stood high above the kingdom of Dalenhart. Below it, fields spread like an emerald quilt stitched with silver rivers, and orchards bent under the weight of plums and apples. At Rowan's side ruled Queen Mirielle, a woman whose calm wisdom could steady a storm and whose laughter brought warmth to the coldest hearth. They governed not through fear, but by listening. Farmers came to speak of sick oxen. Merchants sought advice about trade. Traveling minstrels offered songs in exchange for a roof. Rowan welcomed them with patience, and Mirielle always found a gentle word or a cup of honeyed tea. Their subjects loved them, for they were steady as oak and kind as sunlight. One year, however, autumn arrived strangely sharp. Frost dusted meadows before the harvest was gathered. Wheat heads drooped, their kernels thin. The river that fed the mills sank lower with each sunrise. Herders returned from high pastures with sheep grown lean. Across the kingdom whispers spread. Something in the turning of the seasons had gone awry. Rowan summoned his council to the Hall of Banners, where tapestries told stories of ancestors who had once battled dragons and led migrations through snow. Heavy furs muffled the voices of his advisors as they gathered around a table carved with runes of stewardship. Lord Halric, broad-shouldered and quick to anger, struck the oak with his palm. "Majesty, we must protect our stores. If the cold deepens, grain will be more precious than gold." Lady Anwen, ever cautious, folded her hands. "Charity is noble, sire, but prudence is survival. Open the barns too wide, and we may doom ourselves." Rowan looked through tall windows at the mist. He thought of cottages where mothers scraped thin porridge into wooden bowls, hoping it would stretch until dawn. Duty weighed heavily, but compassion heavier still. That night, in a chamber warmed by one small fire, Rowan found Mirielle sewing quilts for the sick. "They urge me to guard what remains," he said quietly. "But what of those who already have nothing?" Mirielle tied a knot in the thread and laid her work aside. "A crown is tested not when stores overflow, but when they run thin," she replied. "Its metal is shaped by the courage to give." At sunrise, Rowan stood before heralds in the cobbled courtyard. His breath smoked in the pale air. "Open the royal granaries," he ordered. "Distribute grain according to need. Let not one child sleep hungry while our walls hold food." From then, the palace became as plain as any cottage. Rowan joined stable lads in dragging sacks through the snow. He helped measure barley and learned how to mend cracked barrels so grain would not spill. Mirielle rode out daily, teaching families to dry herbs, to gather bark for broth, and to plant hardy greens near hearthstones where warmth might coax them to grow. Some nobles murmured that generosity would leave the throne hollow. Yet villagers, inspired by their rulers, began sharing whatever they could spare. Woodcutters left bundles at strangers' doors. Bakers divided loaves in half. Even restless boys who once shirked chores now hauled water for the elderly. Weeks turned to months, and the sky grew leaden. One night a storm rolled down from the peaks, shrieking across the valley. Snow hammered roofs and sealed paths. In Greystone, a hamlet beyond the river, the weight collapsed a barn where families sheltered livestock. Rowan himself led riders into the drifts. Lantern in hand, he waded waist-deep, prying beams aside until the last child was pulled free. Meanwhile, Mirielle transformed the great hall into refuge. She moved cots close to the hearth, spread her cloak over shivering shoulders, and sang old lullabies that quieted frightened little ones. Courtiers who had never worked with their hands learned to serve broth and tend fires. But the cold did not relent quickly. Each dawn Rowan oversaw tallies of what grain remained, and each evening he sent rations to outlying farms. Many nights his own supper was no more than thin stew shared with shepherds or woodcutters who had walked miles for aid. In the depths of February, hunger gnawed hardest. Some urged the king to seal the gates. Rowan shook his head. "If we close ourselves off now, we lose more than bread. We lose what makes us a people." Mirielle supported him, though shadows of fatigue touched her face. "Courage," she reminded the weary servants. Spring hides behind the frost, waiting for its hour. At last a gentler breeze swept the valley. Icicles loosened their grip. Rivulets began to sing beneath snow. Green spears pushed bravely through thawed soil. The people sowed seeds with hands rough from winter, tears mingling with the mud. Hope, fragile yet fierce, had survived. By midsummer, fields rolled in gold. Villagers gathered to celebrate with garlands and flutes. Rowan and Mirielle walked among them, leaner from hardship but carrying quiet pride. Children crowned Rowan with a circlet woven from new wheat, and old men clasped Mirielle's hands in gratitude. On the castle steps the queen's voice rose. Here stands a king whose crown gleamed brightest when its gold was almost gone, because it shone with sacrifice. That evening Rowan stood upon the ramparts as lanterns winked below like stars fallen to earth. He felt no glory, only peace, a calm born of knowing that the strength of a realm is not hoarded in vaults or stacked behind stone, but breathed through its people when ruler and folk stand together. So the bards later sang of the winter of Rowan's mercy, weaving the tale into fireside lore. And children learned that leadership is measured not in treasures kept, but in love given, not in standing above, but in standing alongside.